Hello, everybody. We are pleased to have Ryan Grimm back on the program, back on the Central Committee stream.
Hey, thanks for having me back here.
Yeah. If you don't know who Ryan is, he is the author of one of my favorite books on American politics, We've Got People. So if you want to learn the history of the left in kind of the 20th century to the 21st century, I think that's a must read. I think you just did a new edition or a version of it, did you not, Ryan? Or you added a chapter or two?
No, not really. I have a sequel coming out.
Okay,
sometime next year.
That's great. What's it called?
But no. This one I don't have a title yet. It's gonna follow. So that book ends in 2018, basically with the occupation of Pelosi's office by like Sunrise and Justice Democrats and AOC. This one picks up around 2015 when Bernie Sanders is running for president, and then charts the kind of arc of the left from 2015 up through today, from Bernie to the Squad, and then exploring how the Squad kind of crashed into Washington and what the reaction was, from them to the Capitol and the Capitol to them. I was thinking of calling it Culture Clash, but I'm still open. I'm still kind of in the market for titles. What do you think of Culture Clash?
I think it's interesting. I gotta be honest, it's not quite as evocative for me as the We've Got People.
I know.
Title.
I thought about calling this one They've Got Money.
Yeah, They've Got Money is pretty good. And you're also obviously a major political reporter for The Intercept. Are you the Washington bureau chief?
Yeah.
Okay. And you're occasionally a host on Rising on the Hill. So, and a fellow Pennsylvanian, at least you're involved.
That's right. I was at Kutztown Day on Sunday.
Oh, incredible! All right, that's a state college, chat. One of Pennsylvania's many state facilities for higher education that's been hollowed out by continual funding cuts. But so yeah, we're glad to have
fireworks.
You on.
The austerity did not hit the fireworks.
The fireworks were good. Yeah. So we talked. I think it was back in 2021. Early on in the Biden kind of administration, the legislative, I think Build Back Better had started to putter out, like it had hit the wall, and the 6.5 trillion from Bernie was rapidly being slashed and slashed and slashed. And I have to admit, I was pretty pessimistic about anything happening. And
reasonably so.
You had a little bit more of an optimistic view on things. You thought that Manchin was eventually going to, cave on some of the stuff. And I think how would you characterize the reality of basically Biden's first 2 years in office, the legislative accomplishments? Because I don't expect they're going to do a whole lot more this year.
Right. I mean, I think if you compare it to the headiest days of January, February 2021, where Bernie was pushing around his $6 trillion reconciliation package and talking about the $3.5 trillion one as the bare minimum compromise. Yeah. Then compared to those days, then it's a disappointment. But I think compared to kind of any reasonable expectations that anybody could have had for a Joe Biden administration, he's kind of smashed through a lot of those expectations, particularly, given the kind of collapse that we saw in the second half of 2021. He had the courage to withdraw from Afghanistan. It became a crisis for him and for the Afghan people. But for him in particular, because of the way that the media just absolutely lost their minds.
There were a few telegenic images of a helicopter,
people falling off an airplane,
people falling off an airplane, and people crowding to leave. And then there was that terrorist attack on the refugees. So there were a few bad stories that took place with any kind of defeat and withdrawal. You're always you're not. There's no way to do a smooth defeat.
Right. You want to be smooth, you got to win. Right.
Yeah, well, and exactly. That's the issue is I think a lot of people, especially in Afghanistan, have a fantasy of well, I agree with leaving, but we should have left it by leaving a better way. And it's like, no, this is what defeat looks like. This is how it tastes. Don't invade a bunch of countries that you have no cultural connection with, no understanding, and don't have any real desire to, fix.
Right. It's like if people who like robbed a bank and now then they're surrounded by cops are like, I think we got to get out of here. And like getting out gets, becomes pretty messy. It's like, it's not that getting out was the wrong thing to do. It's like, there's just no way. Like you're in a bad spot. Now,
so you would say that was a turning point. Was that the turning point for you on his approval rating? And
certainly, if you look at the polling, that it was a 2-week kind of media spasm, and it does show that there's still enough kind of media concentration in the corporate space that and particularly among Democrats, because what you saw, he was never popular among Republicans. What happened is that he became unpopular among Democrats, which never quite happened with Trump. And so that's why his approval numbers, hung at a certain level, because and that's always the case with Democrats. Democrats are more willing to turn on their own folks rather than
where they
Republicans
hate their base, yeah.
Right.
Republicans are scared of theirs, and the Democrats hate theirs. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but this also happened. Everybody was talking about what hot girl summer. You got the spring where the vaccines are rolling out. Everybody's excited about going back to back to normal, and then Delta comes with a haymaker, and so Delta and Afghanistan hitting at the same time,
and the hardening of resistance among right wingers, and like vaccine basically being a cultural statement, right? So like, who are you aligned with? If you're aligned with the Republicans, you don't get the vaccine because it's just a wussy little virus. It doesn't matter. It's just the flu. And if you're allied, kind of culturally with the, center left, I'm including corporate America in that group, then you got the vaccine. So you have that kind of like 65-35 split. And that's where we stuck, on the vaccine.
And then
that
Delta,
has led...
right.
Say again?
Right, exactly. No, and then Delta created this kind of double imbalance in the economy where you had a lot of the country still shut down, a lot of people staying home. You had stimulus checks, Bernie's $600 plus then the $1,400 and the American Rescue Plan and unemployment. You had a lot of money going out, but then you didn't have people going out, and so people used their excess savings and bought stuff on Amazon, and so and at the same time, they had plowed through so much of the workforce by driving people into the ground, during 2020 and 2021, that now all of a sudden you have people with some money, they're buying a lot of stuff. There aren't enough workers to work the supply chains. The ports are clogged. You start to see inflation.
Well, and there was also that, this is an underreported story. I think you talked about it, Ryan, at the time, but basically we have these like cartels of transport shipping companies that are foreign flagged, and they raise the price to ship a container from, Asia 7 times. And so the more it was clogged, the more money they made. And so they didn't have any incentive to like get things going. And Pete Buttigieg, as kind of like the quintessential corporate neoliberal, wasn't interested in applying any kind of like state power.
He's like, what do you want me to do about transportation? This is not my job.
I'm the transportation secretary. I'm here to stand around and go on MSNBC. And like, I think the thing that, and this is a thesis I want to run by you, Ryan, is like, I think we are fully in media brain in a level which I don't think we were in the past, in the sense that people have retreated to these kind of media spheres, and you just have your kind of, it's like being a sports teams fan. I know this analogy is very belabored in politics, but I think now it truly is at this level where you like Pete because he wears the blue jersey and he goes on the TV representing the blue team. And it doesn't matter if he's incompetent. It doesn't matter. Same thing with Andrew Cuomo and killing all the old people in nursing homes. He was on TV. He's on your team. You make a parasocial relationship with him. You are a fan, and that's it. You don't care about the death rate. You don't care about whether transportation is collapsing. You don't have any material connection. It's just a consumer product of entertainment through the television.
And I think it's connected to a lack of faith that anything good is possible.
Yes.
And so if we can't be engaged in a collective project to make the world a better place, then at least we can see our team win, and we can see the other team be humiliated or owned.
Right.
And to your point, like if the fact that absolutely everybody who's even remotely paying any attention knew without a doubt that when Jen Psaki was done at the White House, she was going to MSNBC, really tells you that we're in the media brain space. Like, because that would have been weird in prior generations. Like when Stephanopoulos did it, went from wherever he went, ABC, from Clinton to ABC.
Yeah,
ABC. A lot of people were like, that's wild. Like, you don't do this. Like, this is a very
Isn't there supposed
unusual...
to be a journalistic separation between the two? Like, how can you fairly report on the media or fairly report on the administration you were just a part of?
And he was very kind of strident about saying, like, no, I'm done with politics. I'm not going back and forth through this. Like, I want to be... This is what I want to do. I'm going to be unbiased.
But everybody wants to do. Media, baby. Woo!
Right, exactly. Although these media folks now, like, they're just getting CNN and MSNBC contracts in their downtime from like going back into politics or doing politics at the same time. Nobody thinks that Jen Psaki is going to, become like Stephanopoulos and be a Sunday show host who grills both Democrats and Republicans. You'd have to have charisma for that.
So
right, she's got wit. She's good, and people will watch her, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, no. I mean, MSNBC libs, right? Like, so, like, yes. The type of people that got us Biden are the type of, and that's a significant portion of people. Right, you'll get
that's a couple million a night. Yeah,
yeah, that's it's not nothing,
right.
And
which is what the Sunday, like the late night shows have kind of devolved into that too, to further draw out your thesis, like. You've got your Gutfeld on the right, and then Colbert no longer going for like a broad audience. Colbert is just going for basically people who have watched MSNBC all night, and now are turning over to tune into the late night show with Colbert.
And like I feel gosh, I know. Let's talk, for example, about a recent breaking news event, Ryan, if you don't mind, which is this raid of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago. And I got to tell you, my first reaction, it was funny because I saw you post and I had the exact same thought at the exact same time, which is, this better be something big. It can't just be he kept menus and schedules from his time as president and he kept little knickknacks. There better be like he's selling the knock list of our spies to China or something. Like
a Khashoggi memo or something.
And there is just... And for what I'm hearing, and maybe something will come out later, it's literally menus. And I can't believe it. And it's sort of like when you turn on kind of like Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, it's this kind of like intonement about the sacred confidential documents. And it's like the president of the United States is above classification, which is an arbitrary thing that's done too much by bureaucrats. How do you see this like event affecting politics, if at all? And are you concerned with like the institutions and the security apparatus going forward and it interfering with our politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got to know what this was for sure. Like if this was just kind of
his schedule,
a bunch of boxes of menus, like, and people might not realize, like, literally, like the soup of the day at like the Pentagon or the CIA, different parts of the Pentagon and the CIA, like the soup of the day there is classified. And so
they classify everything.
Absolutely everything. You're like you said, your schedules are classified.
And I remember, Ryan, not to interrupt, but just to remind you, like when Hillary Clinton got in trouble for deleting emails and mishandling classified information, the thing that they were asserting she had on her server, one of those things was her schedule. And she was like, my schedule is going to cause me to get in trouble? Like, what? Like, I could declassify my own schedule, like, give me a break.
Especially past schedules. I mean, exactly. Okay, fine. Like where the Secretary of State is going to be in 1 month. All right. That I get it. Fine.
But now the shoe's on the other foot, and it's supposedly some big deal that requires a raid. And it's like, there better be something here. And I'm not hearing it. Are you hearing any whispers that there should be some bombshell?
No, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing. I think we don't know enough yet, but you're right. It like this better be, Sandy Berger was arrested for smuggling some classified information out of the Clinton administration, I think, for a book. You have people write books all the time and they submit them, for a classification review. And oftentimes like things are crossed out and they say, they'll sometimes in negotiation, other times like, you can't say this. And a lot of those things are based on notes. All of those notes therefore under this definition are classified. Like basically anybody who's ever taken notes, could be arrested for taking their notes. So it can't be that. Like it has to be something significant. And if it's not, I think it's a catastrophe on a whole bunch of different levels.
And yeah. So I think we're on the same page on that story. And obviously I took some heat, even from my kind of lefty community, when I was like, I don't even think this should be a crime. Like the president of the United States should be able to, and former presidents should have grace for stuff that was, at the very end of their term, being able to declassify this kind of stuff. That's totally their prerogative. And even though I don't like Trump and, I would want him to be put in prison for the myriad crimes he did commit.
Mm-hmm.
How about we focus on those instead of this ticky-tack shit? And I think the reality is, like, the Democrats don't want to go after him for the crimes that were part of being president, because that would set a precedent for their own crimes being prosecuted. But they want to go after him for ticky-tack shit because maybe they feel like they won't commit that. But to me, with Clinton,
they will.
They will, exactly.
Right.
So it's batshit crazy. So all right, like let's talk about like the IRA and the Inflation, I guess, Reduction Act, and like how is your feeling about that as far as like a piece of legislation that could change the midterms, the energy? Do you feel like there's something significant in it, or is it kind of just people feel good in Washington, but as far as politically, it doesn't have an impact?
I mean, I think there will be a lot of races that are decided by, low 4-digit, even 3-digit numbers, just like there were in 2018 and 2020. Mm-hmm. And so, to the extent that a couple thousand people get fired up in a district and say, you know what, all right, maybe there is a point to all of this, that could swing a few races. I do think that the sense among kind of the normie activist community, the ones that went to the Women's March, the ones that did all the text banking and phone banking in 2018, the ones who given $25 to every Senate candidate across the country, like among those people, I think there was a deep sense of betrayal and kind of disgust a month ago with the Biden administration, that nothing that you kept hearing from people, I did all of this and I got nothing for it. And you could say, well, this was the guy who actively ran on the fact that he was going to do less than anybody else. But that aside, whatever, they expected more and they weren't getting it. But now the sense among, I think, that community is different. Like that community feels like, okay, they actually tried, and they actually are getting something done. And probably a lot of those folks actually prefer a smaller bill. If you gave them a choice between 3.5 trillion and the 700 billion, they might actually just choose, not because they're compromising, but because, they don't want, that they're more moderate politically. So I think that to the extent that it gets those people back fired up to phone bank and to vote and to tell their friends to vote, that I could see it having a short-term boost, and to the extent that it demoralizes Republicans. Although this Trump raid is kind of really throwing a real wild card into that question.
Yeah, because I feel that's one of the things I wanted to link this to was, obviously with Roe v. Wade being overturned, and I think part of that betrayal that you're talking about was the Biden's kind of flaccid response
absolutely
to Roe v. Wade, and also, the failure of Build Back Better, and the kind of like the hardening of people's kind of like realization of what a really conservative Supreme Court is like. Democrats have been getting rolled on the Supreme Court since LBJ left. They've just gotten very lucky in the people that the Republicans have put on in an office were not ideological enough. You had your Souters, you had your Sandra Day O'Connors,
right?
you had your...
No, Breyer was Clinton, right?
I think Breyer was Clinton. You had a few people that were conservative overall, but they would give the Democrats wins. They'd give them
like
W's.
Kennedy did the gay marriage. Right?
Gay marriage with Kennedy is another great example. Is like, so the Supreme Court, for kind of an institutionalist liberal, for much of the time it's been dominated by conservative justices, has given them enough treats that they could at least respect the institution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now the sum total of decades of failure in the judiciary have now come to the fore, and you've got 5 radical right-wingers, and their intent is to remake the judiciary. I think all that combined has really it fired up people. Maybe it got people angry. But now you have this raid on Trump, and will this serve as a galvanizing, thing for the right, do you think?
It does seem that way. I think it really does depend. Like if we find out tomorrow that there's some Khashoggi memo that's like a bombshell that was in those boxes that he was trying to steal, that changes everything. But if it turns out to be just menus and schedules, then all of the momentum from the January 6th hearings, which was, pushing Trump down, which was giving fuel to DeSantis, and all of that, I think, is gone. And Trump becomes, in the pole position again. And that could indeed get people fired up, get on the right, get fired up. Now it could fire people up on the left too, which is kind of the fundamental dynamic that we're living in now, is that there's an interplay always now between, the enthusiasm on both sides.
So, we had some midterms yesterday. There was some exciting stuff. There was a scary result, but ultimately went our way with Ilhan Omar's primary. But we've had a few breakthroughs at the Senate level for people that are not necessarily squad members, but, I would call them on the left flank of the Democratic Party, which, with Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, and of course, the guy that I've been supporting for literally years, John Fetterman. It's funny, Ryan, this is a story for the chat, but Ryan and I originally had conversations when I was running a state legislative campaign in eastern Pennsylvania, in your home area. And John Fetterman was running for lieutenant governor and primarying the centrist establishment candidate Mike Stack, who had some weird scandals. And, John was out there, he wrote me a check for $2,000 for a Medicare for All candidate for state Senate, stuff like that. I remembered, and him campaigning for us and helping us push back against the establishment Democrats who wanted us to lose. And now he beat their asses again with this, he absolutely humiliated Connor Lamb, whose career hopefully is over. What is your thoughts on that, and what's your kind of thought on the position of the progressive left in toto? What are the threats and what are the opportunities going forward? And what do you think of John in particular?
Yeah, he has this really interesting combination of, as you know, in the Pennsylvania suburbs among Democratic voters, and also in the cities among hipsters of the multiracial hipster kind of population of say Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's this curiosity / what would you even call it, about the rest of Pennsylvania, the Alabama in the middle. And so a lot of, and a lot of the political calculations end up being made with the question in mind, not necessarily driving it, but sometimes driving it, of, how will this candidate play in the rest of Pennsylvania?
Right.
And so, Fetterman, because he kind of codes as this 6'9" white biker dude,
and he is from York too,
York, and was the Braddock mayor. Loves to talk sheets. He just scans to voters who that wouldn't be their first choice of an archetype. They think, wait, he stands for everything I believe in, and I bet those other folks in the state, they won't all love him, but if you can get the opposition from if you can get into the 30s, in the central part of the state, then you can run up the score elsewhere and you can win. And so I think that really is what fueled him. And if you look at Wisconsin, for instance, and Mandela Barnes, there was a candidate, what's his name? I think his name was Tom Nelson, who was a county executive in a Trump county, who won, repeatedly won.
He talked
about
elections. Nationalizing oil, didn't he?
Talking about nationalizing oil, Medicare for all, and he was most famous for this. There was a paper mill that was shut down, and he worked with basically the union and the town and like the county, and got financing for the workers, and like saved this mill, like for all, for the kinds
like they bought the mill so that they could keep running it. Yeah,
basically, yeah, and then allowed it to become a like union owned whatever, like massive
co-op. Yeah,
he wrote a book about it. It was like this huge success. And so, but he like visually, he just scans as kind of a boring white guy.
Right.
If he looked like
Fetterman,
I think he wins the Wisconsin primary.
Yeah. And I wonder. Okay, tell me if you think this distinction has any merit, because when in the left in DC, there's so many different kind of flavors of it. People kind of broadly put them in the progressive caucus or whatever. But there are people that are like the Squad, and I would say about who I align with the most closely personally. But I would say that the way they present involves a lot of like activist forward language that would be incomprehensible to the everyday voter, right? Like if you're talking about patriarchy and misogynoir and all these other issues, which are important and I agree with, but if you talk about somebody in York, Pennsylvania, they'll have no clue what you're talking about.
Right. Patriarchy is probably the most relatable of those terms that they're.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But they're just getting started with that one. You're right.
And then you have people like like John Fetterman or even Bernie, who in his 2016 appeal, he was very strong on those issues. He believed in them. He believed in racial justice and women's rights, 100% with NARAL, etc. But he talked in kind of like a universalist language. And I've said with like John Fetterman in particular, like he's very strong on trans rights, but it hasn't hurt him because of the way he talks about it. It's always like, don't single out these people, don't bully these people, as opposed to like a dissertation about gender theory, which is valuable and true, but in a political, electoral sense, it doesn't code. So do you think that is part of their success? John's success is he doesn't offend the left.
Right.
He has our support, and he also is able to be progressive while appealing to those people in the middle.
I think, yes, I think that's some of it. I wonder, no, I mean, I think you're right. I think like that's the equation for why he can get away with it, and why it works, not just get away with it, but actually works, is one, like people are, as a rule nowadays, generally supportive of trans rights. And so if you can, align yourself with that position, you're actually going to do fine with a general public who agrees that trans rights are human rights. People should not be bullied while you're singling these out. And then he kind of leaves it for the most part there. And I know Republicans really want to push him a lot further and try to get him to embrace a lot of the more activist-y elements of the debate, but by keeping it at this universal, simple kind of fundamental values level, he's able to avoid getting tangled up in that. Whereas a lot of the Squad members are, they would, because they're much more engaged maybe with, activist communities, they're gonna get pulled into those conversations, and then they're gonna say stuff that's gonna get them, ripped apart here and there. But I also wonder, going back to his just general archetypal appearance, how much extra room that gives him, because I think people look at him and they're like, even if he's saying something that if they heard it from AOC, they think it was radical, or heard it from Ilhan Omar, they think it was radical. They hear it from him and they're like, well, he looks like a biker dude from central Pennsylvania. That must be just salt of the earth, common sense stuff. So I wonder how much of it is kind of rooted in a really, imbalanced and unfair kind of playing field that the squad is operating on, that they
part of sexism and
yeah,
racism and Islamophobia is them not being given the benefit of the doubt.
Right, you're gonna impute to them the craziest, most extreme radical ideas, and you're gonna impute to Fetterman the most common sense views. And so I think you're right that there is a distinction that, and he's effective at it. He also has this kind of ingrained American advantage because of the white supremacy culture, or whatever you would call it, like is a real thing in the way that it kind of seeps in
right.
to just our kind of how we understand people and code them.
So would you say that overall it's been a tough year for progressives or the left in the Democratic Party? They've held their own, or they're getting beat up? How would you kind of broadly categorize it?
I mean, I think,
or mixed.
I think it's like they didn't get everything, but I think it's been I forget what your earlier one was, but I think it's been quite strong. Like to come out of 2021 and 2022 with a $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, and then if you combine the infrastructure bill, which actually did have a lot of climate stuff in it, and a lot of bad stuff in it as well. You combine that 1.1 with the 800, it's another $1.9 trillion bill. On top of the burn pits, couple $100 billion for healthcare for vets, which isn't that's Biden, really. That wasn't really a thing that the progressive left was pushing, but they're certainly happy with it. But to have a $4 trillion program pushed through Congress, which includes hundreds and hundreds of billions in climate spending, and includes these like climate banks that can deliver really exponential investments in climate spending, I think should be certainly compared to what we were looking at just a couple of weeks ago. But the way I think about it is the status quo was headed for like oblivion, like apocalypse, because we're at a place now that the economy is so fundamentally tilted towards fossil fuels that clean energy and clean energy technology just can't get the investment it needs, can't get the oxygen it needs to get off the ground. And the only way you're going to be able to, I think, turn this around to create a livable planet over the next 100 years is through exponential technological innovation. And I think the left doesn't like to think about it in those terms, and I don't either. I wish we could just dial down fossil fuels and turn the crank on renewables and clean energy and be done with it. But
I gotta say, Ryan, like, from my point of view as a Pennsylvanian, I can tell you that like all austerity is a fucking loser, whether it's green or yellow. Yes. It doesn't matter. Like if you're telling people that they're going to have to be colder in the winter and hotter in the summer, and they're not going to be able to eat the food they like, and their everyday experience is going to be one of more poverty, they're not going to support that.
Right.
And so you need to come up with an alternative.
Right. Yeah.
And the reality is it's not true. If you've ever been to someone who has a full array of solar panels on their roof, they are actually experiencing energy abundance. Mm-hmm. They have their AC set exactly as they want it. They have they have everything set, and they're like, I am actually got more energy than I know what to do with. I am saving money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It is actually, being green is awesome. It's not poverty. It's not terrible. Somebody who had a cheap electric car, those that exist, they didn't suffer the gas price spike. Mm-hmm. They largely have been paying the same rates, maybe up a little bit, a cent or two per megawatt hour, but they're experiencing like their energy costs for the transport isn't going up. They're experiencing energy abundance. And I think that story of green abundance is one that is like speaks to Americans, and it's just not being told. And that's one of the things that concerns me is this, like, I would call it the professional managerial class censorious type of personality that wants to say, we are evil, we are bad, whip ourselves, humanity is the disease. That's the weird shit that's just never going to appeal to everyday people. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the activist community, and especially in green spaces, is dominated by that kind of talk. And I just think it's an electoral loser. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. They can correctly counter that. Look, here's the UN data. Like here's how much fossil fuels we can burn based on our models, and not collapse human civilization. And therefore, like we don't have a choice. And it's like, I agree. But look what happens when gas goes to $4.
Well, look at what's happening in Germany. They have a green, to interrupt you, but just with I think it's really insightful is just the Green Party is part of the government with the Social Democrats, and they're turning on coal plants because they don't have access to Russian natural gas anymore. So if the Green Party is saying, well, we need electricity, we don't want to be turning the grid off, that's what will happen unless we establish robust supply. And so, I'm 100% in favor of, spending big on green energy and just having it beat them on their own terms.
And I like this idea that we're going to try to do a continental wide, semiconductor industry. Now, I think there's some questions about where the raw materials come from. I think Russia and Ukraine are the only ones producing it now, and then shipping it to China. But I think there's potential here on the continent, the North American continent. I think that's all great. Having clean energy security, I mean, clean in quotes, because there's a lot of mining involved. But these are all, I think,
mining is a relatively local damage, which is obviously bad, and there's limits to that, and we obviously want to protect biodiversity and everything, but a mine for rare earths damages the immediate environment of where the mine is, whereas climate change alters our fucking climate on the whole planet and kills millions and causes billions of people to become refugees. They're a different bit of a scale. And I think that's certainly part of what I'm talking about is like that flattening of harm. There's bad, and then there's like civilization ending bad. And I think
Right. No, and I still feel pretty pessimistic about the climate, but I feel like this gives us a chance. Like if you're in a casino, like we weren't even playing like to win before. Now at least we have some chips on the table. And we'll see what can be done with these what will become trillions of dollars, because it's 300 plus billion in this climate bill, whatever was in the infrastructure bill towards climate, but that will be, like I said, multiplied many times over, because there's so many companies and so much private capital on the sidelines that was just waiting for subsidies, basically.
Right.
They're like, we're not going to spend billions of dollars.
Subsidize us like you subsidize our natural gas and coal, Right.
We're not going to compete. We're not going to compete. They do these they were doing these 1-year tax credits. Now it's 10 years, which is great. So that's some, you can get in a business and like know that you've got 10 years. So you're competing, against these massively subsidized incumbents with huge political power with uncertain technologies. And you're like, we're supposed to save the world with this. So now at least they're getting some subsidies so that they can at least go head to head.
Yeah. And speaking of like playing the game, the thing that I was most concerned about in our last conversation was the Democrats' inadequate response to Republican like changes on the electoral side, like voter suppression, gerrymandering, the way that super PACs have come to dominate even Democratic primaries, especially from like AIPAC. And it's all of that failed utterly. The Democrats did nothing to shore up the party's electoral, like structurally, to respond. They didn't admit DC as a state or, do anything to change the calculation on the Senate side, which is tilting more and more against them. Don't you feel kind of, at least I do, feel very pessimistic that this may be like the high watermark of the Democratic Party is the next 2 to 4 years. And then we get into a situation where the Republicans have 55 senators and there's just no way of doing anything ever.
Yes, that's why I think it was so important to get this through now.
So you agree with that very pessimistic view that we're about to enter a period where the minority rule for the time being?
It certainly looks possible. I mean, when it arrives, I think is not certain. Like it could be punted down the road a little bit, but yes, the demographics are ugly. And it's like what was the old IRA saying? Like, we only have to get lucky once. You got to get lucky every time. Like that's sort of how the kind of Senate calculation and the presidential calculation is starting to work for Democrats. Like they have to massively overperform every single cycle in order to just stay even
and win every swing seat consistently to have a chance at 50-50.
And then when they have a cock up year like 2016 where they lose Katie McGinty, they lose Russ Feingold, they lost that Missouri Senate race by very thin margins, then those seats are gone for at least 6 years.
And right now they have a senator from Montana, they have a senator from West Virginia, they have senators where else? Ohio senator. Like these are not long for this world based on just like the trends of how politics is going. And they're at 50-50 right now.
Right.
So where are you getting the 3 or 4 more Senate seats that you need to at least have a shot of holding the Senate?
It's really hard to see where. Like you have to because like you said, the Midwest is fading.
Iowa's gone. That used to be a place we got seats. Missouri you mentioned. There's no senators from Louisiana anymore that are Democrats. There's no. They got both Senate seats in Georgia by the skin of their teeth. What amounts to a miracle.
Right. Georgia, because of Atlanta and retirees, you could maybe make an argument that it and North Carolina could be trending in a Democratic direction, like Arizona, which they already hold those two though.
Yeah, that's the thing. They already hold those, and those are difficult fights. And they got all 4 of those. They got both Arizona seats and both Georgia seats. New Hampshire's a question. So they are in a situation where the Democrats right now have all these seats they probably shouldn't have or are lucky to have. And there's like a delusion that, oh, well, we're going to get more. Right. And I'm like, where are you getting
somewhere
these?
It's just like, right. Like the ones that they hold, they just have a rock solid hold on. Now, if they wanted to get really creative, they could do like, in the 1850s, the kind of the Republican elites out in New England paid people to go to Kansas and populate the state of Kansas so that when there were elections,
we could have a bleeding Kansas part 2. Hell yeah.
What Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, like these like wildly tiny underpopulated states, like if they can get broadband, you could see 100,000 people moving to each and swinging them. If people are moving anyway. I
think those kind of trends.
There's a big sort going on. So if it happened to like fall out that way, I can't imagine how it could be done in an organized.
See, the only problem is there's not a good infrastructure in this country to facilitate that kind of stuff. Like if you look at China, China will build a city of housing and then connect a high-speed rail to it, and then, hey, you want an apartment? Here you go. It's basically free. That's why 90% of Chinese own their own home or apartment. Because the government actually plans to provide that as kind of like a basic human right, and then delivers on it. And the U.S., we don't have anything like that.
Right, and people are moving to these states now, and it's just collapsing their infrastructure.
Well, everybody, remember how, Texas was the place because it was affordable housing. Well, that's not true anymore. It's skyrocketing in price. Now, Austin is just as expensive as almost any other major city in the country. Phoenix. It's all the same. I mean, the last cities that are kind of affordable are like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And I think they're eventually probably going to have the same fate. So do you think, like, is there any kind of knowledge or expectation of what we're describing, which I think anybody with a reasonable sense of what's going on sees the writing on the wall? Why wasn't there a push for, like, say, DC statehood, or maybe Puerto Rican, or divide California? This sounds radical, but radical solutions are needed if the Democratic Party wants to ever exert power again.
My sense was that basically Manchin just kind of took that stuff off the table and was like,
because he'd be irrelevant. It would hurt his power, so he didn't care.
It's more about his branding in West Virginia, that like he's the bipartisan guy. You know, he's not in Washington to help Democrats. You know,
but Brian, come on, you can come up with bullshit politics speak like it's wrong that Americans can't vote, you know, and I just believe that Americans have the right to have representation. No representation without taxation. You could come up with some spin.
You sure could. I just think that they couldn't get anywhere near him doing it.
Which is incredible. A party, if there were 800,000 Republicans in a city that didn't have any representatives, they would have been a state 20 years ago, right?
Yes. And the other thing that they need to do is combine some of these states, like North and South Dakota, having 4, like, get out of here. Like, that's...
Well, that, you know, Ryan, it's funny because we might have mentioned this the last time we talked, but I pointed out, if you look at the study of the history, there was only a Dakota territory.
Right.
They like Republicans divided it for the purpose of getting 4 Senate seats, and they've kept them. And it's like incredible.
Although they still lost the Senate that cycle. I think that was the 92 cycle, 1892. And yeah, they created a whole bunch of states because they were getting crushed around their corruption, and like silver populism was surging, and so they made a whole bunch of states to try to hold on to the Senate.
Hey, the party of bankers is not popular? Well, who knew?
Yes, and they even started adopting some of the silver stuff. They're like, sure, we'll do that. But yeah, so. Oh, but then Democrats took, I think it was 92. So that was the first time Democrats took full control of government since the Civil War. And then they got the Panic of 1893 right out their doorstep, suckers, and got wiped out for another generation because of that. But right, you're right. It was Republicans who were like, why don't we make this 4? Why just give ourselves 2 senators?
Yeah, like, and you know, they always, and it's always amazing to me because maybe I'm just so Machiavellian that I just see these very easy, like, well, the Senate's unfair. Why don't we just make more states? You know, like, why is this crazy? Is it really make sense to have a state of 50 million people and a state of 500,000 people and have equal representation? People love being in California so much that they like having no representation in Congress?
Right.
Like,
but it's also, since we're doing history, it's really what started the Civil War in a lot of ways, right? Because the South wanted Texas so they could make it a slave state.
They admitted California as like, you know, that's how states came in. Like, it's so odd that people pretend like the Senate or the states that we have is some sort of gift from God. It's a 50, which is an even number, I guess. And, you know, people just are happy with that. Yay, we have 50.
Right.
And let's equate North Dakota with Pennsylvania. Let's equate North Dakota with California. That makes sense. And that is actually the cause of our dysfunction, is the anti-democratic nature. And it's surprising that the Democratic Party is not doing anything to change those structures. So how scared are you about like the 2024 elections resulting in some sort of like anti-democratic rupture with the Republicans? They got a lot of crazies nominated this cycle.
Seems guaranteed that it'll happen, at least in some states. Because Biden, you know, I guess the election was close in a few states, but he won by like, what, 7 million votes?
Well, he won big in the popular vote, but it was, you know, relatively close in a lot of states.
Right, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin.
Yeah, a lot closer than people thought. The Dems underperformed the polls as usual.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I very, very worried. Like, I think you just had a Minnesota Secretary of State candidate win on the Republican side, who's an election denier.
I think all the Republicans, statewide Republicans in Arizona, are election deniers. I think every single one.
Arizona is a rather important state.
Yeah. I mean, you're counting on them to have the Senate, and then what if they don't? They refuse to certify one of the senators.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a million things that could go wrong here, and the Dems did nothing. They didn't even pass the Manchin bill.
They're apparently now, negotiating the Electoral Count Act.
But doesn't that say the governor is the final authority? I thought that was like a very dangerously bill that may
details,
not actually protect that much.
Yeah, you got to be careful. That's the problem in a system like this, is that who has the authority? Like in a system where half of the players don't respect the rules, like how do you? Yeah, because somebody has to count the votes. So who do you have do it?
I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head that you can't write any rules that fundamentally, if people don't respect, that you're going to solve that problem of them not respecting. I think it was Pompey who said something. You can't quote laws to a man with a sword. Like that is actually the situation. Yes. There you go, Chad. That's some nerd quotation for you. They learned it, when Caesar took the Senate and took Rome, they learned their interpretation of laws, and their feeling of righteousness didn't actually stop the people from storming the gates. And you would think January 6th would give them clarity on that they should have built the institutions up. But it seems to me, outside of just funding police blindly, they haven't done that.
Right. To me, the way to actually respond, if there's ways to make the electoral count process better, I think they should do that. But yeah, ultimately what you have to do is put people like Mark Meadows in jail. People who are the, Trump,
Professor Eastman, like those people, why aren't they in prison?
If you're a functionary who knowingly participated in an attempt to undermine the election, and you fail, like, you have to suffer consequences, or else you just keep doing it until you succeed. So I think that's why you need like consequences for somebody like a Meadows, so that future secretaries of state or future chiefs of staff who are thinking about whether or not they're going to go along with this plot are like, oh, I could actually go down myself for this. So boss, you're on your own. Because without the chiefs of staff, these people are,
I think a lot of people
helpless.
thought that was going to happen, right? And now that it hasn't happened, it's actually emboldened a lot of people. And I think the raid on Trump is a perfect example. Look at the GOP's response to it. They didn't wait for any facts to come out.
Mm-hmm.
They just went full hog at the FBI. And now you have people on the right screaming, defund the FBI, defund the Department of Justice. I think those are serious political demands that we should be aware of. And they're not doing it because they think that the FBI is unfair. They're doing it because they think the FBI is fair. They want an unfair FBI. And if you're a person who hates the FBI like I do, and you say, oh, the FBI is already unfair, just remember, it can get worse. So what are your thoughts on that, and like that kind of like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Trumpian charges against the FBI and the institutions?
Yeah, it's just part of this creeping politicization of everything. That up until
one-sided though.
Right. Up until
isn't that the threat? Isn't that the risk, Ryan? Sorry to interrupt you so much, but I'm trying to get to a very focused point, which is like it's still one-sided. It's still one-sided.
Yes, it is. I'll be very curious what happens, what we learn about this raid, because it's certainly possible that it emerges that this is an actual pushback, but it might also not be. But yes, you're right. Like it's still, and this has been the case in democracies across the world, that the kind of center left party of like eggheads and professors and educated people.
Cass Sunstein.
Yeah, they keep quoting rules to the guy with the sword. That this is not like unique to the Democratic Party of the United States, though it is, a central element of it. So yeah, like we'll see, because things that can't go on forever don't go on forever. But we'll see what breaks first.
So there's one story that I want to draw your attention to. Maybe you're aware of, but in Milwaukee, they just elected 2 DSA candidates to the Wisconsin State Assembly, both of whom came on this stream a month ago, and we raised a few $1,000s for them, which, as I'm sure you're aware, in a primary is I'm not taking credit for the wins, but they came on here and
no, that's a lot of money in a.
And
some
we,
of these small races.
I gave them a lot too, because I saw that they had a shot, and I was like, the fact that I have any amount of money and I could give it to a socialist candidate is going to be a huge
who might win,
and they did, including beating a local incumbent mayor. Like they went, they did. It was a hard race, and they kicked ass. What is your thoughts on like being optimistic going forward? What is your thought on the Ilhan Omar race? Should that be a red flag? And where do you see, the left in 2 to 4 years?
In some ways, you want your most radical candidates eking out victories. And there's some question about how many Republican spillover votes. You again have to fact check me, but it looked like the Democratic vote total, and obviously it's a very Democratic district, so it's going to be lopsided, but it looked like it was way more lopsided than it ought to have been. And you may have had organized and also organic Republicans asking to vote against Omar because they hate her more than they hate anything. So she, somebody like her has to overcome that. But in some ways, I mean, obviously you want your radical popular agenda to be massively popular, but also for people like Omar, you want to push the envelope. She's somebody who isn't afraid of going places that other politicians won't, and that we have to be honest that's going to come at a cost. And so in some ways you could say, like,
so you would say that you attribute that more to like her positions being fundamentally challenging as opposed to like a campaign failure. Like, I know that she didn't.
I think
spend
she
any
wasn't
money
up on air.
Yeah,
right?
She didn't spend any money on paid comms.
Right, which is a terrible idea, because that's going to, it's just a fact that paid comms move the needle in a world where people
especially
don't
if
pay a
you're
lot of
not
attention
matching
to politics,
them, right? Like, so
yes.
I think her challenger was on the air and she wasn't.
Yes.
That's
so there's that too.
Bad.
No, that's absurd. That's absurd, because she should also be aware that she's pushing the envelope. She knows she's pushing the envelope. So she's got to be ready to defend.
But you don't see that as a big red flag. You see that more as like, okay, you learn a lesson here. You got scared,
see.
But
we'll see. Some people. I think she's certainly capable of learning.
It's going to invite more challenges in the future, though. If you lose by a close one, they're going to come after you again.
It certainly will. Like Rashida Tlaib, had a very credible challenger her second time around, the woman that she only beat by 1,000 votes, and who actually beat her in the special election, Brenda Lawrence. And she just utterly mopped the floor with her. And she had to
took
move
it seriously.
Districts this time. She took it very seriously from day one. And so, Omar's, there are a lot of politicians out there who get a scare early, and it sharpens them. We'll see if she becomes one of those, or if she just can breezes through and does. I wouldn't expect her to make that mistake again.
Yeah.
But
she didn't lose.
Right, she didn't lose. No, the DSA wins in Milwaukee are really exciting. The one,
how do you feel about Vermont? Do you think that was more of like a burnification of Vermont? Because that's always been a question for me, is like Bernie is very popular in Vermont, and he had in Burlington, Bernie people are very popular, but overall it feels like kind of the Democratic establishment had a lot of the other seats. They failed to ever mount challenges very well for the governor's race. Do you think there's been kind of a change in Vermont?
this was a huge win for Bernie and for that, because Bernie has been his own guy. Like, he built a machine he built a party and a machine in Burlington. But statewide, like he has, like you said, he's kind of been his own person. And you've had Pat Leahy, who's been in office since 1974, as a very dominant, kind of more establishment player in Vermont politics, who Bernie actually ran against as an independent in 74, almost cost him the race, winning like 3% or something. And Leahy went all in as much as he could for this for Molly Gray, who's the lieutenant governor.
Got destroyed.
And total corporate Democrat. Like, she said in a debate, she was asked in a debate if she would not take corporate money or take lobbyist money, and she's like, just look at my financial filings and you'll see. And you look at them and it's just all corporate and lobbyist money. So she had, so she had the backing of the Leahy operation, super corporate Dem. She's lieutenant governor. And what I was worried about is that Bernie was going to do his thing where he's just aloof from the races and not endorse. And there was a very progressive candidate who represents Brattleboro, which is like the crunchier than Burlington, down in the southern part of the state. And there were two progressives. One of them dropped out and endorsed the other, which was a nice thing to see from the left.
Change of reality. Yeah. Solidarity. What the fuck?
Weird. And then Bernie did endorse, like, in early July. And people, her supporters were hoping he would, because like they align on everything, but there was absolutely no guarantee just because of Bernie being Bernie. And so he came in, and it clearly helped. Like, she blew Molly Gray out.
Yeah, she crushed. She crushed. Yeah.
And this was a race where Molly Gray was the favored candidate. Like, this should not be seen as like, well, it's Vermont, so of course it's Bernie Sanders. Of course they're going to elect the left-wing candidate. No, not at all. Like, Gray was considered in Vermont to be the front runner. But did you see what happened in the Republican primary?
Oh yeah. I wanted to talk to you about that. What Can you explain what happened in the Republican primary? Because I get asked this question a lot. Like, what about running as a Republican? Is that stupid as a progressive Republican? And I'm always like, don't do it. Don't waste your time. It's never going to work. Well, egg on my face, it worked.
Although,
explain what happened.
Probably worked pointlessly, because I assume Becca Balint will just win by 50 points.
Yeah.
But and because there's I think only like 20,000 Republicans voted in the primary. Like,
in the whole state?
Really aren't in the whole state. Like, I don't think, and there's only one member of Congress for the whole state. I don't think there are many registered Republicans in the state. Even people who are conservative and might even support Trump, like, a lot of them are either registered independents or Republicans. But yeah, so this guy, he's a veteran, became like a leading anti-war activist, and ran on a pretty kind of like significantly left-wing platform, which included some left-wing eccentricities. Like, I think there was some anti-vax stuff thrown in there, and somebody was circulating on some 9/11 truther stuff. But like, but overall, like, a dope platform, minus some real like collar tugging stuff. And he said in the Republican debates and in videos, he said, I am not a Republican, to be clear, but I am running in the Republican primary. And he was saying, like, look, here's my appeal to conservatives. I'm not just punking you. He was like, here are the things we agree on. We agree on, the value of community and family and personal responsibility, and anti-corruption, and that the system is broken, and that we need more direct people representation. I saw him saying that, he's like, look, it's true. Hunter Biden should not have been doing what he was doing. I agree with you on that. He was. Wait a minute.
Hunter Biden isn't a qualified Ukrainian natural gas expert?
Apparently.
How do you wait? No way.
Apparently there were other reasons that he got put on that board.
Yeah, that was wild to me. I can't believe it. Well, it's paid off for Ukraine. Hey,
there you go.
They got $50 billion in returns. There you go.
Smart.
This
on
is
their,
why you do
so,
it.
Yeah.
This is why you do it. You throw a couple board seats and you get a 20,000x return. It's great.
There you go. So he ended up winning. He won the Republican primary. He had initially said that he was going to win it and then decline the nomination, and then run as an independent in the general, which is what Bernie does. But in order to do that, you have to have like the agreement of the party, because the party can come in and
nominate someone else.
Nominate somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the Democratic Party has agreed with him. We won't do that. And obviously, the Republican Party was not going to agree with this guy, that they wouldn't do that. So now it'll be like, this like Becca Balint, the Sanders-backed kind of squad aligned Democratic nominee will be the right-wing candidate.
Now, how many more like squad
election.
members are we getting? We're getting we have
Greg Casar
from Texas,
out of Austin. I don't know any others.
We did Summer Lee from Pittsburgh.
Summer Lee, of course, Summer Lee. Yeah, and then Becca Balint. I don't know if.
So it's growing. It's happening.
Yeah. So that takes you to 9, right?
Yeah, and then you have.
I mean, assuming Jamal Bowman survives.
Yeah. What's your feeling on that? Is that?
I think he should. Mondale Jones.
What about the challenge to Mahoney? And is that a long shot now?
It's a long shot, but
you wouldn't be shocked.
Or would you be shocked? Sounds like I'd be shocked, because it does seem like she's down healthy double digits. But Roe v. Wade, and general discontent with the Democratic establishment, I think could.
So it's Alexandra Biaggi, or is that not how you say it? Biaggi, because it's Italian.
Yeah.
Biaggi.
Biaggi. Her father or her uncle or something was a big machine politician in New York.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who I think Elliot Engel ousted. There's some drama that goes way back.
Well, it's funny because it all goes back to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and you had these machines and Tammany Hall, and then Al Smith, and then FDR, the New Deal. It all started there in New York, with machines getting beat and changing, and then machines losing to machines, and it's always been a source of intrigue that goes back a long time. New York politics,
for sure.
Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything that we should be looking for from you other than your book that you're working on, which is the medium-term project? What about on the immediate short term?
I mean, I'm trying to step up my newsletter a little bit more, which is called Bad News, which is over on Substack. I've been doing it before Substack even existed, but people can find that. But otherwise, I'm taking most of this month off to work on the book.
Oh, great. And obviously, if you haven't read We've Got People, you should read it to get caught up, at least to 2018.
Right, exactly.
Because it'll help draw the lines between, Bernie Sanders and the Rainbow Coalition and, the failure. And the thing that was really interesting to me, Ryan, and why, I hope you don't mind me promoting your book.
I don't mind at all.
It is the discussions of the failures of the Obama administration and just how much of, I would call him a loser, you might say ineffective, that Barack Obama really was, and how just terrible he was as a president, especially when he had 60 senators or 59, 58, depending on the day. That was eye-opening. And also, like, the Progressive Caucus has kind of a compromised organization that we need to do something about.
Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking to think about the lost opportunities of 2009, 2010.
Yeah, the public option stuff is so compelling. It makes me want to rant. Honestly, when just thinking about that part of your book, when you lay out like the public option math, the passing out of the House, and just them just throwing it in the shredder, and then doing reconciliation anyway.
Right. They're like, we don't have the votes. Well, here's 51 people who say they'll vote for it. They're like, yeah, anyway.
I think they said it was 55 at one point.
Yes. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
So like, but they ended up passing everything in reconciliation anyway, so they didn't need 60. Yeah. Somehow
and then Reid suggesting doing climate through reconciliation, and the White House being like, nah. And so, as we've seen now, like, you obviously absolutely can and must do climate through reconciliation. Like, that's the only way you're going to get it done.
I mean, you're never going to pass anything of ideological note through the Senate. Everything will have to
with
come
60
through
votes. Like, that's never happening.
It didn't happen then. Even when they had 60, they didn't do it. So it's just it is what it is. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for coming on. I'll have my mods spam out your Twitter account as well, so that hopefully some people will follow you, because I think you're one of the best and most important political reporters in America. Thanks so much for all your work.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate you coming on.
You got it. All right, talk to you later.
See you soon.
Bye.
Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.